I'm going to stop sharing. We're going house to half. And with that, I'm really excited to get us started for this very special panel that we have for all of you today as part of our Green Quarantine series. So welcome everyone. This is again Green Quarantine. We are the Broadway Green Alliance. I'm Molly Braverman. I am the director of the BGA. I use she, her. And I'm thrilled to introduce who we have with us today for this exciting topic about climate restoration and our path to climate positive. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor right over to the wonderful faces and voices that you see in front of us. And I would like to introduce you to Rick Parnell, who is the CEO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and Erica Dodds, who is the COO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And with us, and to speak to all of them, we have 4 youth climate activists. We have Ashley Meeky, Brooke Robertson, Emma Roth, and Jessie Plank. And I would like to note that Emma Roth is, in fact, for those of you familiar with our program, a College Green Captain and the winner of our College Green Captain Prize this past school year. So without any further ado, I would like to turn it over to Erica, who is going to be our moderator for today's session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Molly. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us to do this event with you. It's really wonderful to be able to join forces with such a great initiative. So to kick us off, I'm going to have Rick Parnell give us an overview of climate restoration before we hear from all of our youth activists.
Thank you, Erica. Hopefully you can hear me well. I've had some technical issues, so hopefully it's cleared up. So again, thank you, Erica. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Molly, and thank you, everyone at Broadway Green. And a special thank you to Charlie Duell and Norma Duell, who I know are watching. If it were not for Norma and Charlie bringing us together, this partnership between Broadway Green and the Foundation for Climate Restoration would never have happened. As I think you saw in the notes, I am the CEO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here today with all of you. Thank you to my colleague Erica and to our panelists, Emma from Broadway Green, the Foundation for Climate Restoration Youth Ambassadors Jessie and Brooke, and the Foundation's newest board member, Ashley Meeky. Ashley is one of our original youth ambassadors. She was able to join us in New York last September for the global launch of the Foundation at the United Nations. This is my first opportunity to get to introduce Ashley as a board member of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. I know this will be an inspiring discussion. Throughout history, it has been the youth who have brought about the change needed for humanity to make major leaps forward. And it has been the theater that lays bare the challenges we face, as well as inspiring us and bringing out the best in all of us. At the Foundation for Climate Restoration, we are building a movement to reduce CO2 levels in the atmosphere to the level before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. This is 300 parts per million. This is an incredibly aggressive goal, but it is necessary to ensure a habitable planet for future generations. We must do 2 things at the same time to reverse the catastrophic damage of climate change. First, we must reduce to 0 the amount of CO2 we put into the atmosphere each year, known as net zero. And second, we must remove the excess CO2 that has accumulated in the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. This is what we call climate restoration. Let me share my screen, hopefully, share my screen and show you a quick video. So many organizations are working on climate change. At the Foundation, we see climate change as a 3-legged stool. First, there's mitigation, slowing of both the speed and the amount of carbon we are putting into the atmosphere. Second, adaptation, building systems to allow us to adjust and sustain ourselves against climate change. And finally, restoration, returning the Earth's atmosphere to a safe and sustainable state. This is where we at the Foundation for Climate Restoration are focusing our work. Many organizations are working on the first 2, mitigation and adaptation, which is incredibly important, but it also only focuses on not making our future as bad as it's currently on a path to be. For thousands of years, the Earth has been sitting in a productive level of carbon dioxide. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, humans have been filling that tub with excess carbon, turning on the faucet. Fast forward 2 centuries today where the tub is overflowing. Mitigation and adaptation work to turn off the faucet and to stop filling the tub with carbon. However, even once the faucet has been turned off, the tub will still be open, still be full of carbon. That is to say that 95% of the carbon, legacy carbon, will still be in the atmosphere even when we achieve full mitigation and adaptation by 2050. Restoration is working to pull the drain and empty the excess carbon. Thank you. All right. The good news is that we have both natural solutions and the technological ability to accomplish both goals. We can return our atmosphere to the healthy level of CO2 that existed before we began relying on fossil fuels for energy. We need broad civic activism, political will, and investment to restore our climate to pre-industrial levels. At the Foundation for Climate Restoration, we are working to build the ecosystem needed to achieve climate restoration by 2050. We work with technology entrepreneurs, investors, companies, scientists, artists, faith leaders, youth organizations, governments, NGOs, and citizens globally to advance the use of natural solutions and commercially viable carbon removal technologies. Finally, let me say that we believe the most important tool we have is using your voice. Now more than ever, the youth movements we are seeing globally are leading the way. As the oldest on the panel, I want to say a huge thank you to my youth colleagues for inspiring us and holding us accountable. With your inspiration and leadership, together, we can change the trajectory of climate change and ensure a habitable planet for your generation, your children, and your grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. So next, I'm going to have each of our young people introduce themselves. Let's go ahead and start with Emma Roth.
Hi, folks. So I'm Emma Roth. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is actually where I am right now, but I go to school in Boston at Boston University. I am a rising junior studying theater arts and political science with a minor in environmental analysis and policy. A little bit about my climate and environmental background. I've been involved with the Sunrise Movement in Ann Arbor and Boston, and I'm actually currently working on the GRIT initiative, or Green Responsibility in Theater initiative, for the BU School of Theater in tandem with the Broadway Green Alliance. In terms of climate restoration background, I'm very new to this concept. I just learned about it last week from these lovely people, but I'm really excited to learn more with you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Next, let's go to Jessie.
Apologies for that. Yeah, so I'm Jessie. Hey, everybody. I use he, him pronouns. And I am a rising first year, was previously a graduated senior at McDonough School in Baltimore, Maryland area. And I'm going to Washington University in St. Louis next year. And sort of my path to sort of as a climate activist, in a sense, is I started out in high school with, I met a couple different kids in my class and in my school and greater community who were interested and passionate about this topic, about climate change, and specifically, again, you know, the three different legs of the stool. And so we created a group. We were just like-minded people with like-minded passions, and we created a group called McDonough Goes Green within our high school community to help, you know, change the culture of our community. Our overall sort of mission statement, if you will, was called, or was, we made it was to cultivate a culture of environmental sustainability. So it was not only an effort to shift our ways as a carbon producing school, but also just change the overall culture around the climate change conversation in general. And we worked on a bunch of different things with stream cleans. We built a green space and a couple of different movements with protests and strikes on our campus and in our greater community. And then we finished up with the understanding that most of us were seniors leaving next year. We wanted to leave our mark on our school and make sure that our efforts continue on with past years, and we create our own sort of Green New Deal with an effort to work with the administration and the students to curate a list of different things that the school can meet by 2030, with a couple different promises to reduce our carbon output and overall just change our effects on the planet in terms of climate change. Yep.
Thank you so much, Jessie. Let me just mention really quickly for those of you who haven't been on a webinar like this before, if you put your cursor over the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see a Q&A widget. If you click on that, you'll have the ability to type in questions. So please, as we go, if you come up with any questions for myself and Rick, or for any of our youth activists, please go ahead and just put them in right away, and we'll address them as we go. We will likely be calling on you to unmute yourself and read your question when we're ready to address it. So be prepared. All right. Next, let's go to Ashley. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ashley Meeky. I'm a rising freshman at Vanderbilt University. I use she, her pronouns. And as far as my background with climate restoration, I'm generally new to this topic. I first learned about it last year at the Coalition launch. But ever since then, I've been super intrigued and excited to get involved in every and any way that I can. And I've just been learning more about this amazing, amazing way to save the earth. And I'm super excited to talk to you all about it and find different solutions.
Thank you, Ashley. And finally, Brooke.
Hi, my name is Brooke Robertson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Chicago, and I'm a rising high school junior at Jones College Prep. My climate and environmental background, I'm just like youth activist. I've also been involved with my family from a young age. My dad was very involved, and my mom now runs some legacy funds and other things in those areas for solar, like education and all that. My climate restoration background, I'm pretty new to the subject. I went to the UN conference with the Foundation for Climate Restoration or late last year. So I'm pretty new to the subject, but ever since then I've been learning more and more and getting more involved. So
Thank you, Brooke. So let's go back to Emma. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your work is like with the Broadway Green Alliance and how receptive your peers are to ideas about climate and sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. So since 2019, I've been working on the GRIT initiative, as I said, Green Responsibility in Theater initiative, fully supported by the Broadway Green Alliance, which has been amazing. So the initiative is really to create immediate short-term and long-term goals for the School of Theater at BU to reduce our waste significantly and increase awareness about climate change and sustainability in general. So at this point, some things were thrown a little bit off track because of the pandemic, but right now we have 5 different waste streams, which is really exciting, from snack wrapper recycling to construction waste recycling. We're getting compost bins in the fall. In coordination with the Broadway Green Alliance, we have green captains in our rehearsal rooms and production meetings. So for those of you who don't know, Green Captain programming started with the Broadway Green Alliance, and it's essentially someone who volunteers in a production to be a liaison between the cast and the BGA, and to really just promote sustainable behaviors in the rehearsal room and during productions. So at BU, we have green captains in rehearsal rooms and in production meetings because we have so many design and production folks at the university. We've also been working on making some fun or not so fun fact sheets about our buildings. Frankly, a lot of people are really on board. At least in my generation, all of my peers are really excited because they all sort of know what's coming. We're all at least a little bit afraid. Climate change is here. And more things are certainly coming down the way if we don't stop them. I think it's been more interesting talking with professors about climate change and reducing waste, because so many are excited to become more sustainable, but becoming more sustainable really requires a shift from more traditional theater practices. So I think that's why I'm really excited to see so much out of the box thinking coming from so many of my peers and from so many in this webinar today. So yeah.
That's fantastic. And how do you decide what initiatives to take on?
So there's this whole long proposal for the GRID initiative that really covers like immediate, short-term, and then long-term goals. So some of our more long-term goals are things like really investing in solar panels, which is a long-term goal because it has to be done in tandem with the university. It can't just be the School of Theater decides to. But then some of our short-term goals are really things like reducing the amount of waste that we produce, working with our scene shop to make sure that everything is recycled properly so it can actually be recycled through construction recycling. It's really sort of at this point figuring out what works within the scope of the university because we are so tied to it. Yeah.
It sounds like you're being really creative though about identifying problem areas and then seeing, what opportunities there are to work through them. So I think that's really fantastic.
Thank you. It's really interesting in theater because we are so inherently impermanent. So we do go through a lot of material. So a lot of it is, using sort of like both that costume box of ideas, but also thinking outside of the box to figure out what works in a theater setting. So it's exciting.
Great, thank you. Moving to Jessie, you told us a little bit about your work with McDonough Goes Green, but I'd love to hear more about the conversation that you had with your peers. That how do you decide that this is what you wanted to do? Like, how did the idea come about, and any idea what's next for the group now that you had that the McDonough Green New Deal and the leadership transition? What's next?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. So a couple different things with that. Pretty loaded question, but in general, we started out in the group and we were a bunch of like-minded people who just happened to come together because we all were working on our own sort of independent projects within our school and our school community. And we came together, formed our own sort of group and created a sort of alliance, if you will, with the administration or a coalition, I guess, to work with the administration as well. But one of the biggest things that we originally saw right off the bat from the students and the other people in our community was that nobody is necessarily against climate change, against activism, against whatever that sort of entails. Most people are sort of indifferent about the topic or not educated enough about the topic. You hear it on the media, you hear it all over the news, which is, oh my gosh, climate change, this big impending doom that's coming and there's not much that we can do about it. And everybody just sort of brushes it off because they believe that they as individuals don't have a voice, they don't have an ability to change their future, to take any action towards helping our future. And so again, one of the things we saw was that people are sort of indifferent. They're not against it, they're just sort of indifferent. So our main goal is to educate them in the first sort of thing. The easiest way for us to do that would be through a couple of different methods with teach-ins or protests or strikes, and just gain awareness for the topic and for just the topic in general. And hopefully through that, we were able to sort of change, again, our culture. That was our main sort of goal, because we can do as many different things here and there. We can create a green space, we can do a protest, we can do this, and that. It doesn't really matter as long as we can create a lasting effect with an overall culture throughout our entire school, so that the individuals can then go out and meet other people and go into their families and say, hey, mom, maybe don't throw that out, recycle that instead, or whatever it is. The overall message was to let people understand and gain the knowledge that they have a voice, that they have an ability to change their future, to have some sort of effect on their future and what's to come. And again, your second part of the question is what's next for me and our group, I guess. And so as I said earlier, our group was mainly made up of seniors, and we just graduated this past year. And so our main goal, at least with our high school community, was to bring in underclassmen and younger students who could then carry on our movement and carry on our club. And that's what we did. We brought in a couple of the students, we educated them, we took them under our wings type of thing. And we helped create the movement and at least make it long lasting within our school community. And I guess the next step for me is in college. And we'll see what happens. I guess I am very sure that I will continue on with some sort of club or some sort of initiative or working with my university next year. Sorry, was there another part to your question? Or?
No, that was great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Moving on to Ashley, when you got activated around climate restoration, did you face any resistance from your peers or your teachers?
I would say I faced more doubt because being young people, we don't have access to these mainstream resources, and we felt that we couldn't make a significant impact, or we don't have the financial means to do anything significant, or our voices aren't going to draw a lot of attention or audience, and we just felt kind of useless. So I think there's a lot of doubt about how we can face climate change. But once I introduced them to the subject of climate restoration, it really brought that hope factor and made them realize that there are tangible strategies and techniques that we can use in order to combat this. And then after that hope factor was introduced to them, I really feel like they looked inwards and saw for what they can do themselves to help out. And I really encourage them to realize that everyone has a part to play. And no matter how small that part is, it's just as necessary and it's just as useful. And every effort is needed. And as long as we all do our parts, we can really do something amazing. And so I think that definitely helped them and made them realize that, you know, it's okay to have a small part. As long as you're playing your part, you know, it's all for the best.
Great. Thank you. And, you know, based on your experience with running into that doubt about people's ability to make an impact, what would you love to see go differently in college?
In college, I think they have the foundation for learning about environmental awareness, and different clubs and organizations are already involved. And I think once I enter the Vanderbilt community, I would really like to see more awareness be spread around the campus and really engage with my peers about different solutions that we can take in order to combat climate awareness. And because we'll have like a campus behind us, we'll have funding, we'll have contact with major companies and organizations, I really feel like we can make a difference. And as long as we have access to those mainstream resources, and then we have access to our own ideas and passions, I think that amazing things can come out of that. And so I'm really looking forward to that.
Wonderful. And Brooke, you have told us a little bit about how you first got involved in climate action. Can you tell us a little bit more about your own story?
Yeah, so when I was younger, my dad, who was the CEO of a solar panel company formerly known as Amnex, he died when I was 7 in a plane crash. So after that, I mean, I was very, very young, so I didn't know much about like what he was doing. But as I got older and I learned more and more about what he was working towards on like the front lines of sustainable energy, I got more and more like inspired, and it's kind of been a personal goal of mine to try to continue his legacy, not only through like solar education and being involved with organizations to do with renewable energy, but also with climate action in general, climate restoration, with like the Foundation for Climate Restoration as well. So yeah, it really started like from my dad and being inspired by that. So
that's a really inspiring story. Thanks for sharing that. We have a few audience questions. So I want to go first to Jack Sullivan. Would you mind reading your question for Rick? You can unmute yourself.
Sure. Hello. Let me kind of shrink it up, but I'm a little bit worried about the atmospheric carbon levels that are up there already. So how do we increase mind share and capital toward restoration versus the other two planks, adaptation and mitigation? They seem to be capturing more of the mind share that's out there in our global community today. And I frankly think from a standpoint of risk, restoration appears to be a more important challenge.
That's a great question. Thank you, Jack. This is exactly why, so thanks for asking it. This is exactly why we're working to build the ecosystem for climate restoration. Could not agree more. When we started this work a couple of years ago and actually launched the foundation officially last year, it's been a combination of people having sort of that aha moment of, wow, we actually can do this, and they get energized. So, and they talk about things like hope, as Ashley said. And then there's also part of the community that says, wait a minute, we have a plan. We have to just at least not make it as bad as it could be. And, you know, for us, that's just not acceptable. We can, you know, walk and chew gum at the same time. We can actually do full restoration, remove the carbon. So what it means for us to build an ecosystem is things like right now, having partnerships with people like Broadway Green, having partnerships with Earth Day and several of the different organizations that are working on climate and helping them. You know, Earth Day just announced a couple of weeks ago that their new messaging for the next couple of years is restoration. As Kathleen Rogers, the president of Earth Day, has said, is that mitigation adaptation, to your point, Jack, is getting all the attention. But why are we only talking about reducing how bad it can be when we should go for full restoration? We owe that to the generations that you're seeing on the screen. So working across faith, We've launched several initiatives, including a solutions exchange. One of the words that I'm increasingly hearing about the foundation's work is glue. Who is the glue between all these different sectors? And so investors are saying, I can't find the entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs say, I can't find the investors. The activists say, I'm not sure what is the message around restoration. So we're trying to be the glue to bring it all together. And we are using tools like working with the Vatican, working with the UN, working with some of the people that are putting on COP26 next November, these kinds of different lines of work in order to build out the full ecosystem. Final point is, it's my own belief that wherever you are, you should be hearing climate restoration. You should hear it at school, you should hear it at work from your employer, you should hear it in the pews, you should hear it on Broadway, you should hear it wherever you are. You should be hearing about it's possible. When humanity is told that they're doomed, they freeze. So to my point earlier about how both youth and the arts can inspire us, they can take us to that next level of actually, we can do this, we can own our future.
Thanks, Rick. We have an anonymous question that I'll go ahead and read, and I think this can go to any of our youth people, so just chime in if you want to answer it. Activating ambivalent peers can be frustrating. Where did you find your educational resources, and can you tell us some specific actions you've taken to move your peers to feel responsible for greater impact? Ashley?
I will say, I will give credit to my school that I did learn about like the mitigation and the adaptation, but I really credit my education of climate restoration to the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And attending that coalition launch last year really taught me about not only climate restoration, but the actual techniques that they're invested in order to reach this goal. And I think that's really powerful because now I can spread that word to the rest of my community, and then they can go out and spread it to their communities. So that's where I really credit my education. And as far as educating my peers, I feel like hope is a really powerful motivator. Again, I told them about the topic of restoration, and also I told them that they don't have to have this big mainstream impact. It just takes one person at a time. It takes impacting one person's mindset and bringing awareness to one person at a time. And people forget that that's how you run marathons. It's just one step at a time. And once they realize that, that really made them realize that their actions are not taken for granted, and that their actions and their sustainability lifestyle is very useful and helpful. And just telling people that their actions, no matter how small, is very motivating. And I encourage you all to do that as well with your friends and peers.
Thanks, Ashley. Jessie, go ahead.
Yep, thank you. So great question. At least in my high school, or for me at least, the main source of education, especially in this day and age, is mostly everybody has access to an incredible amount of knowledge just at their fingertips with the internet and various different forms of media and articles and things like that. You can search climate change and you find an incredible amount of articles, and just the amount of access that we have to information is incredible. So the main resource for me in the beginning that I saw was, the message was mainly brought to me through the media. And the media was, from what I could see, they started out with the two forms of the stool, as the video said. They started out with mitigation and adaptation, where the main things that we saw from the media is this company is doing this, or this organization is doing this, without a lot of help, or without a lot of voices heard from the restoration aspect of it. And that's where F4CR comes in, the Foundation for Climate Restoration. For me, it was a relatively new topic. I recently heard about restoration in a more in-depth way, rather than just on the media or through other outlets, through the Foundation for Climate Restoration a couple months ago. And I think that's been one of the key sort of aspects for helping educate my peers and help move them towards the sort of mindset or the culture that they have the ability to change their future. Because there's sort of two sides to it, which is, there's one where you can start out with the mitigation adaptation, which is the real hardcore facts that are there, and they will be a little scary because there is a very necessary sort of need for us to come together as a community in terms of the people in the world to battle those things, because we need to slow down the amount of carbon that we're producing right now. And then there's also the side of it, which is you have the restoration, which is the hope for the future. This isn't an impending doom. We have actions that we can take to make it a more hopeful future. We can actually reach our goal of not only below 500 parts per million in the next 50 years, but also go below where we are now and keep going down and down and down until we sort of anecdote this, this problem, if you will. And then for me, I guess the main sort of outlet that we chose for our students or for the people and my peers in my school and the greater community, we did a couple different teach-ins with other different protests and on-hand stream cleans and things like that. Just to especially emphasize the idea, as Ashley already said, which is the small actions can make a big difference, especially because the majority of my peers see climate change as, oh my gosh, we need to radically change our entire economy to get anything done pretty much. And that's not the case. It's upwards of 7 billion people in our world or something like that. Each person making a small action here and there can have a big impact. And that's just sort of the main message that we try to explain to our peers and to our school community.
Thanks, Jessie. So building off your point there about how what we tend to hear is so doom and gloom, and it doesn't need to be that way, for any of you, has the way that you've listened to conversation and like internalized conversation about climate change shifted at all since you heard about climate restoration? And can you tell us about how that might be? Go ahead, Brooke.
I just know that like how a lot of everyone else has been saying that it's a big doomsday conversation most of the time. And I think since learning about climate restoration, now I can know and also educate others that there is a way to fix it, not just to like stop what we're doing, but also a way to fix it so that it's not like, oh, we're all gonna die, the world's gonna go up in flames. Like there's a way that we can have a positive outlook on it and not just a big doomsday, like negative, nothing can change type of attitude towards it. And that really came from learning about restoration and the ways that people are doing it, especially the Foundation for Climate Restoration and all the initiatives there. So yeah, I would say that that definitely changed how I listen to those conversations and also how I participate and educate others about the issue.
Go ahead, Emma.
So I really just very recently learned about climate restoration, so I can't speak to long-term effects, but I've been a part of the Sunrise Movement for a while now, and Sunrise also puts a really large emphasis on hope. One of the big taglines is, "Together we will change this country and this world, sure as the sun rises each morning." So I just really want to reiterate how important hope is in general. And I think that climate restoration, as you have all been saying, is about the same thing. It's about promising us not just a future, but a better future, clean air, clean water for everyone. And I think sometimes I do fall into the trap of climate change gallows humor, but climate restoration and Sunrise and the hope that those provide have been really uplifting. So I recommend that all of you also look into Sunrise and F4CR. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Emma. And there's a question for you from an anonymous attendee. Do you think that the pandemic will slow down the Green Initiative at Boston University? And what steps do you think they can take to get back on track?
It's a great question. So I think that the pandemic in general is going to radically change the way that we approach theater, not just greening theater, but everything in theater. It's going to dramatically change audience sizes, where we can do theater, how we can do theater, where we get materials, things like that. So I think that now is actually a really, really amazing time for theater communities at BU and in general to take a step back, reflect, and really drastically change the way that we operate. And that's both in, what materials do we use? Where do we source them from? Where do all of our materials go? Can we invest in things now that we're not spending money on production sets because we just can't have that many people in a space? So can we buy solar panels? Can we do something else like that? I think this is a really great time to think about that. And it's also a really great time to really think about how theater works in general. This is my small tangent. I really think that the American theater industry needs to have some sort of Green New Deal for ourselves. And I think this is the time to maybe do that. I think that we need to recognize and reduce our waste in materials and energy. And we need to recognize that we're also part of so many systems. These are the first two principles of sustainability, use, and systems. So we're part of so many systems, environmental, social, economic. And we need to, in reimagining our theater, actively support BIPOC, queer, and disabled theater makers as well. And I think it's just a really important conversation to have in general and right now. But yes, I think the pandemic is a time for us to reevaluate how we operate in theater in general.
Thanks, Emma. That's a great answer. We have a few questions that I think should actually go to Rick from Mark Capron. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Mark, if you could unmute yourself and read your question about UNESCO and your most recent question about least developing countries.
UNESCO. Is anyone here on the panel, thinking how to help UNESCO plan the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences for Sustainable Development with more of an emphasis on climate restoration? The climate sustainable development goal is not very restoration-y. It's just get to negative or get to net zero. And is that question good enough for now?
Yeah,
it's a great question. So thank you for the question, Mark. We are working with several of the different UN agencies, UNEP, UNOP, the Youth Advisor, Envoy for the UN, and to some extent UNESCO. But more importantly, we have an initiative, the Ocean Climate Trust, that launched earlier this year. It's run by a colleague of mine, Brad Ack. He's formerly of WRI, with WWF. Yes, thank you. I always get them back and forth. Thank you, Erica. And he left WWF because great organization, no question, but they were not willing to be as aggressive as he thought they should be on oceans for full restoration. So he is actually leading a group that is working on solutions and testing these different solutions for full restoration. That's one. And then two, our partner, Sir David King at the Cambridge Center for Climate Repair, is also working on some ocean solutions. Again, one of the big things that we need is testing and guardrails so that we can deploy these and deploy them more broadly and rapidly. And this will feed into the COP26 with all the different UN agencies and bodies next November.
Cool. What was the other question?
Your other question was about least developing countries, or at least developed countries.
Yes, I noticed that it looks like everybody here is from a developed country, including myself. And we really got to get the least developed and the developing countries working hard on this, for their own benefit. And so just, are you reaching out?
Yes, the short and maybe a medium answer is yes. We are new, and so one of our beliefs is that we should work in partnership with organizations that already have great reach. So for example, we're in the process of finalizing a partnership with Girl Up. Girl Up is in 90 countries globally. This will instantly bring climate restoration to 90 countries and thousands and thousands and thousands of girls globally. So that's one angle. The next is that we're working with the Youth Envoy at the UN to try and bring this to all the different UN convenings. That's again a rapid way to try and scale this up. And then the third is that when I was saying how we're building this ecosystem, one of the tools that we have in our tool chest is the Carbon Removal Task Force. We launched this at Davos back in January, and it is a multi-sector, multi-organization geographically. One of the co-conveners is the president of Kenya's office and others, with the idea to grow these sectorally. We're also working with the president of the General Assembly's team on bringing this to the small island states. There's 54 small island states that could rapidly take climate restoration to scale. So to your point, absolutely, we will not get this done without the developing world and some of the tougher nuts like China and Russia, but we will tackle all of them.
Cool.
Thanks, Rick. Thank you, Mark. We've had a few different questions about how do we do this, the climate restoration thing, how do we sequester carbon? And that's kind of my area of specialty, so I'll chime in. One person was asking about regenerative agriculture and using soil as a carbon sink and asking whether that's one of the solutions under the restoration umbrella. And that's a really great question. We do include natural solutions like soil carbon sequestration under the restoration umbrella. we think of solutions using 3 criteria: scalability, permanence, and financeability. And so we think that in order to be successful, we need to be focusing most of our effort in solutions that can scale up to the size of the problem. So we need to be removing 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year from 2030 to 2050 if we want to hit our goal of a restored climate. So we want to see a few solutions that can scale up to around 25 gigatons per year. And that's orders of magnitude larger than anything is currently doing, and much more than people are currently talking about. So things like soil carbon have a lot of potential, and part of that is because they have so many co-benefits. Natural solutions enhance the productivity of natural ecosystems, which does sequester more carbon, and it also produces more food and more biomass and more biodiversity. And healthy ecosystems sequester a lot more carbon than those that don't, and they sequester it for a longer time. They're less susceptible to droughts and wildfires and floods. So their ability to keep on holding carbon is much better than, say, the grasslands in California, which keep catching fire and releasing a lot of CO2. So that becomes an issue of permanence, which is our second criteria: scalability, permanence. So yes, natural solutions that are maintained well over a long period can be very permanent, and a lot of them aren't. A lot of them, a lot of tree planting initiatives really just use monoculture. They'll plant the same tree over a huge span of land where it might not be native, and that can have ill effects. The trees cannot survive. Permanence becomes a big issue there. And it also doesn't have the same co-benefits as the regenerative land management practices I was just mentioning. And then the third criteria that we think of, so we just did scalability, permanence, the third one is financeability. So we're very aware that if anything is going to take hold, it needs to be financeable very quickly. And that typically means that anything that's dependent on large-scale government funding is not something that we're spending a lot of attention on right now, because it's just going to take too long to get going. Of course, there are a lot of things that would really benefit from government funding that would be very much worth pursuing. And we're certainly not standing in the way of any of those, but we do see that with the rapidity that we need to get things moving, it's not worth putting all of our eggs in that basket at the moment. So yes, soil carbon, yes, land management. And then we also see that there are a lot of technological solutions that use biomimicry and geomimicry. They basically look at natural processes that have ground down carbon and the natural carbon cycle for millions, billions of years, and just look at how do we accelerate this process. The Earth has stored, I think, 95% of its carbon dioxide in limestone. So how do we use carbon dioxide to make limestone artificially? The world sinks carbon into the deep ocean. So how do we increase photosynthesis in the ocean so we can do this faster and restore depleted fisheries around the world? So these are the things that we're thinking about, and that's how we conceive of climate restoration solutions. Sorry, that was a longer answer than I necessarily wanted, but let's turn back to our fantastic young people. We have seen, says an anonymous attendee, we've seen that education can make a huge difference, can cause huge changes in behavior the younger we start. So do any of you see a place to start much younger with climate education in your schools? Jessie?
I think the short answer is yes, of course. I think there's definitely an opportunity and a necessity to start the education at a younger age for climate change in general, more specifically restoration. For my school specifically, it was a K through 12 school, meaning we started very young with the kids and the students. And so through our different movements and our different actions in my club and group, we tried to involve as many sort of facets of the community as possible, starting out with younger ages with our stream cleans or whatever it was to gain that sort of education. And in our final sort of push for the end, our McDonough, our Green New Deal type of thing, part of our sort of plan that we had with an agreement with the administration is that they would start this conversation at a much younger age, especially because these kids are so malleable in a sense. They're just taking information in daily. Every minute they're seeing something new, and oh my gosh, that's so cool. So if we start this at a younger age, I think for sure they can just sort of understand this is just a necessity of life. This is just a piece of their life they're just going to keep living with their future. Especially because this is a topic, this is a conflict that will inherently sort of, or undoubtedly, I guess, have some sort of effect on everybody in the world. It'll have some, especially for the younger generations who are growing up in this world where restoration aspects, where we use limestone or other different things with mitigation, adaptation, restoration specifically, these are all sort of aspects of their lives that are going to be changing how they interact with their world and how they interact with their communities. So I think starting out at the younger age is definitely something that needs to happen.
And go ahead, Brooke.
Kind of adding on to what Jessie was saying, I actually have a 3-year-old little brother, and obviously like I'm very involved in everything with climate action and climate education. So like when he was born, I'm thinking like, oh, this is gonna affect, even though it affects me greatly, it's gonna affect him even more because he's even younger. He's gonna be alive during this time for even longer. And so kind of just like educating him and like his little like 3-year-old little preschool classmates as like their foundational just like knowledge of it, just learning about the world, so that when they do get older and they do get to understand more, they can actually like know what's going on in the world and not be like clueless little sheltered babies, because it'll affect them for the rest of their lives. So I guess just like having my little brother like in my life all the time and thinking about how this will affect him really makes me think about how young we actually need to start like educating kids about it, so that they can then take action sooner and sooner, so that it can help everyone.
Go ahead, Emma.
I think it's also just really important to note that this doesn't have to be scary education in any way. Like it's, you know, hopeful with climate restoration. It's a very hopeful conversation in general, but I also, I went to like a really small, we called it a hippie, like K-8 school. But I remember from a very young age, the school would bring in this one man, and I forget his name, but he would sing songs about the climate to us. And we do like different like gestures, like it's the earth. So I think it's just really important that like this is, it's not a scary conversation, and it's important to have, and there are ways to do it that are very approachable for young children that I think us theater makers can also help out with, like creating songs, creating stories. I think it's a really effective way to help teach young people.
Definitely. And as a follow-up to any of you, what can we do to encourage more schools to take this up as a cause, the younger education for climate? Ashley?
I think, well, my school focused mainly on mitigation and adaptation, and I think introducing restoration to a lot of schools can definitely motivate them to invest more of their time in the restoration factor more specifically. And for my high school that I just graduated from, I think there is definitely a need for like hands-on activities and learning and like gardening and stuff like that. And I think that the students themselves are capable of making that motivation or motivating their schools in order to take those actions. But we have to educate our friends and our peers in order to build a community that can advocate for those types of things and advocate for those types of clubs. And I think that that's definitely an effective tool that we can do.
Great idea. Jessie?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's a pretty big question, but one of the biggest things that I've seen is sort of an applause to F4CR, Rick and Erica, is starting out these greater organizations that already have holds in different and already well-established sort of name for themselves, as well as just branches in all different sorts of other organizations and other institutions. Is starting out with some sort of youth initiative, some sort of youth aspect. Because I think the easiest way, from what I've seen in my school, is starting out the kids within the community, educating them, and then and just eventually or inherently they're going to take that message and start transferring that to the administration and to the other people in their communities. And so the majority of the time, it's hard for people to go to an administration in an institution and say, hey, you guys need to do this. But it becomes sort of more in an organic sense from the community within them. I think that, at least for me, has been, in my experience, one of the best ways for really seeing the change that needs to happen.
Thanks, Jessie. That's a really well said. Okay, just looking through the rest of the questions. So oh, go ahead, Rick.
Well, I just wanted to ask the panel, a focus group here, if it were, you know, one of the things that we talk about, and we launched a report in Davos back at the World Economic Forum in January, is that climate restoration, several people have said to us, what we're building here is a new asset class for investment. And the report that we did with Thunderbird University, School of Business at Arizona State University, and we released it, was that directly over the next 10 years, there's about a $3 trillion a year economic opportunity in climate restoration with about a $5 trillion wraparound. So a ripple effect of what those direct investments produce. Is that a motivator? That, you know, I would think that the idea of that there are jobs potentially out there waiting would also be a motivator, or does that not resonate with the youth?
Go ahead, Ashley.
I would say the short answer is yes. I think money is a big, big motivator. And for me, I definitely want to go into business and international business. And they're seeing how much profit there is to make off of climate restoration and all these different technologies that can be invested. I think that's a big motivator into looking not only at the technologies that are already here, but investing more into new technologies and creating new ideas and really getting involved with that. And I think that the more people know about it, the more people will be invested in that, because there's so much money and profit to gain from that, not only for ourselves and financially, but for the earth and holistically. And that's a big, big motivator.
Definitely. Jessie?
I think for sure, yes. A lot of the holdup from what I've been able to see as a young person, not necessarily in the working community just yet, but a lot of the hope that I've seen is these big companies, these big brands saying, oh my gosh, we can't change our entire outlook, our entire economy, whatever it is. And then we'll lose so much money, we'll lose so many jobs. But the thing is that there's such an untapped opportunity within restoration specifically. There's so much sort of, again, as Ashley was saying, money or monetary sort of things are a great motivator for people. Just sort of at the bare minimum, they can say, oh, I can make money off of this idea. And while it may not be in the best interest of the world, they can still understand this is another sort of aspect of the motivation side of turning to restoration methods, and in the end, hopefully changing our economy enough that we can save our planet in a sense. So I guess, yes.
Thanks, Jessie. Ashley, did you want to add on?
Yeah, I saw that as of recently, so many people are unemployed, and I think now is the perfect time to start investing in that profit area for climate restoration and really getting into those technologies, because so many people can benefit from the technologies and for the profit, and it will solve so many issues, including the unemployment. And then now that we're seeing levels go down throughout the earth because of the pandemic, now is the perfect time to make use of that and take advantage of this and continue working and advocating for climate restoration.
Thanks, Ashley. That's a really great point. So we're coming near the end, and I want to kind of go back to the idea of the climate restoration mindset and how that can guide our action. So Sharon has a question that I'm going to read for her because she's sitting too close to me and you'll hear it. She said, it seems that some people hear climate action as having to give up something. How do you reframe the conversation to something positive? And I think we can apply this to any age group. Any ideas?
Sorry, could you?
Ashley? Oh, the question was, it seems that some people hear climate action as having to give up something. How do you reframe the conversation to something positive? And Ashley, you can start.
Yeah, I think the focus there is that people think there's a loss in this, but people don't see that there's also a gain. And if that for you looks like changing your meal or changing your diet or what you consume, that can have internal benefits as well. Having a more like vegetarian diet can cleanse the body. And so that's definitely a gain. And adopting new sustainable technologies or sustainable lifestyles is a gain for your household. I'm not sure how everything works financially, but I'm sure it'll help your bills or something like that. And then also the earth. So there's so much to gain from this. It's not just a loss, and there's so many ways to invest and really get involved. And it may be a loss for like your old ways, but focusing on the future and focusing on the new ways for growth, I think there's so much to gain, and we should focus on the gains.
Thanks, Ashley. Emma?
So specifically about like solar panels and wind power and things like that, from a financial perspective, they will actually make you money. You can sell, if you have them for a certain period of time, you'll be getting more energy than you as a household may need, so you can sell it back to your city's grid. So you can actually make money. In terms of everything else, I like to think of it as not a loss, but as community building, which I will explain. So one of the things that we're hoping to do at Boston University that was a little bit delayed, but we're gonna be back on track for the fall, is we're getting compost bins. And all of that compost is then sold back to different communities. Specifically in Boston, you can take your compost to Project Oscar sites. And then I'm pretty sure that that compost is then donated or sold to community gardens in areas that have food deserts. So a lot of it is about community building and taking care of each other. And I think that's a really exciting thing. And especially from a theater perspective, because we are so focused on community, I think it's a great way to talk about it.
That's a great point. Thank you, Emma. Go ahead, Jessie.
So just sort of overall, that is definitely a sentiment that is expressed a lot of the time around the conversation of climate change, which is, oh my gosh, I need to cut this out of my life, or do this instead of this, or whatever it is. It's hard to sort of tackle because in a sense, like, yes, those things are changing, but it's not really a cut out of your life. It's more adapting your life to fit these sort of things, to fit the necessity that is combating this issue as a greater whole, as a greater community. And I think that it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. There needs to be some sort of understanding that this isn't a necessity. Again, this isn't really like, there may be some things that need to change and adapt your life to this, and that, or whatever it is. But it is necessary, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Perfect, definitely. And with that, we are at time, so I'm going to pass it back to Molly to wrap up. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Erica, for hosting and moderating this incredible session. And thank you, Rick. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Jessie. Thank you, Ashley, for your incredible words and these incredible lessons. I feel richer and inspired from this conversation from all of you. I feel hopeful. I feel like that's the word of the hour. I feel hopeful because of the messaging of climate restoration and what we can do with that and what that can teach us. And I sure as heck feel hopeful because of the four of you and the fact that you guys are out there and not at the beginning, you guys are just deep in this work and deep in this journey. And thank you for doing it. And I cannot wait to see just what action and what impact you are having and what is yet to come. We are all very lucky for the work you guys are off doing. And what great speakers you are, because as we know, you're here at a theater-focused session, and we know storytelling is so critical to the work we're doing. And as we've talked about, getting the messaging out about climate restoration is critical. And so the fact that you guys are all incredible storytellers is going to serve us very well. So with that, a huge thank you, and a huge thank you to all of you attending and participating and learning. Thank you for joining us for this style of session. We will be taking a brief intermission next week, and we'll be back the following week for a lighting specific session. We'll be doing a practical session on sustainable theatrical lighting the following week after our intermission. So thank you again to our friends, the Foundation for Climate Restoration, for joining us. Thank you to all of you. and we will see you again in 2 weeks. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.